Hi, my name's Kara-Leah from the Yoga Lunchbox, and today I'm here with Vincent Bolletta, who is a New Zealand yoga teacher. He's been teaching for a long time. I've recently been interviewing so many yoga teachers from overseas. I thought it was about time I turned my attention to some of the amazing teachers we've got teaching here who may be flying under the radar but doing some great work. So welcome, Vincent.
Thank you very much.
I know you teach up in Auckland. Where is it that you're teaching out of at the moment?
There's a variety of places, but my main studio is Yoga Ground, which I co-share with a friend of mine called Susan Allen. And so we've been running out of the studio for the last 2 years, and yeah, it's a beautiful sunny place that we have.
So for those that don't know you yet, can you give a brief background of when you started yoga and sort of what hooked you about it when you started teaching?
I started yoga 1989. A good friend of mine was a yoga instructor, and I just was drawn to the aesthetic of the practice. And he had such a lovely way, graceful way of expressing the postures, and so I'm quite a visual person, so I was attracted to that, and that was my first introduction, and it sort of continued from there, on and off. I sort of was, involved with the practice, and then sort of distracted, and then back again, and distracted again, and it was just a continuous process until I made a full commitment, probably when I got back from England in 1996, and decided to do something about it and dedicate my effort and time to it.
And is that when you decided to become a teacher?
Yeah, it was decided that I wanted to actually make yoga my life, to become a teacher, and to make it my business, to help people work with the yoga and improve their health and their quality of mind. And yeah, it all started pretty much then when I myself, I suppose, became stable and decided this is what I wanted to do.
So you must have been teaching then for a good 15 years or so?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I was flirting with teaching before 96, when there was no certification. But then when I got back to New Zealand, I thought, well, let's put something underneath the belt or hang something on the wall, and we'll go from there.
Now, when I read your bio, you talk about doing structural rehabilitation and integration, working with movement impairment syndromes. What are these things? What is structural rehabilitation and integration?
So what happens is that you acquire a certain injury through your practice or through a specific event, and usually that injury sort of kind of creates a segmentation within the body, whether it be muscular patterns or neurological kind of issues as well. And so what happens is that the integration, or first is the isolation of that problem, rehabilitating it back to normal health, and then integrating that area of the body back to the main, if you like, main body, and it's trying to structurally integrate it in a particular way that it functions now in accordance with everything else. So the movement impairment syndrome is really basically, on a simple version, it's an OSH kind of scenario where you have a repetitive movement that is not balanced, which over a period of time causes strain, and that strain is felt either at a moment or it builds up over a period of time. And so the impairment really is usually a structural issue, where the joint or the movement pattern is not clean enough or clear enough, it's not integrated enough. And so you think of a squeaky, hingy door just not working well, and what we basically do is trying to create a little bit more balance, and through that balance, the movement is more cleaner, less friction, less irritation, less agitation. So that's basically it.
So you're really
in a simple version.
Right?
Sorry?
You're really talking yoga therapy, isn't it? Applying yoga to the specific person and individual. Yeah,
it is yoga therapy for sure. It's also catching injuries before they happen. So when you're looking at somebody practicing and seeing their form, or the way that they move, or the way that the body behaves, or the way that person perceives the information that you're providing, you're almost going to determine the outcome in terms of what will happen in the future. And so what you do then is start to change certain aspects of the way that they either perceive the movement or understand how they move, or literally in a gross fashion change their position so that it's more accommodating to where they are as a practitioner, and at the same time maybe also to where they are with their understanding of their body and their practice, you know.
So in essence, the irony is that while yoga can help us heal injuries, yoga can actually create injury, can't it, when we're doing things slightly off, repeatedly?
Oh, absolutely.
Like high plank, low plank.
Yeah. Yeah, not all yoga is good yoga, you know, so you have to take in consideration who the practitioner is, what are their inclinations and tendencies and their bias, and from there you determine, you know, what kind of practice they should be doing. But at the same time, if they choose a particular pathway, say a vinyasa class, you can still orientate the practitioner to have good awareness, good structural awareness, good understanding of their body, so that certain positions they may have to adapt. In other positions, they can work as a general thing that they are doing with the class. So the practice should be adaptable to the practitioner, not the practitioner adapting to the practice.
And this is something you're quite big on, isn't it? That everyone, our practice evolves over time, doesn't it? According to our lifestyle, but which stage of life we're at, and then say how long we've been practicing, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
Also got to take into consideration emotional states of being, occupations, stresses of their life. So there's other components as well to the person that's practicing. And most people will be practicing probably twice or 3 times a week. You know, maybe for an hour and a half at a go. And that's a very small kind of window to the yoga in relationship to what they do in the rest of their day or the rest of their life. You know, so you have to take in consideration who that practitioner is and what's involved, and then make necessary adjustments or suggestions really that will suit them, which then makes their practice more sustainable. Because really that's the catchphrase for me, is making a practice that's sustainable.
So what does that mean then, to make a yoga practice sustainable? What's it look like, a sustainable yoga practice?
It does look like it's. I've been practicing now for 20 plus years. I continue to want to practice another 20 plus years. So as you mentioned, as we age, my practice has to mold itself to where I'm at and adapt to where I'm at, so that I can continue to practice.
So do you think there's a bit much emphasis on the real fancy, awesome poses at the moment in the yoga world?
Well, yoga is more than just asana. And so hopefully we train our mind as much as our body, yeah? And so, and a good teacher of mine said, you know, yoga is not about your hamstrings, but it's about your mind, you know, and ultimately that's where yoga comes from the way that you perceive things, the way that you define your experiences in the practice and what you use to define those experiences. So really that's where the practice is, the essence of it. And if I can simplify it even further, the essence of the practice really is in your breath. But you know, it's fun doing all those fun things. You know, it's okay, it's cool, it's not a big deal. But ultimately, there's more to that.
So when you refine it back to it's all about your breath, what exactly are you meaning there? Like, how would you, for someone who is just walking into your class for the very first time, how do you explain that the breath is all important?
Well, that's a good question, because I think you have to adapt your teaching to where people are in terms of their understanding of themselves and the practice. And so you feed bits and pieces of information. So when we talk about the breath in a beginner class, we sort of start to first tap into what the breath is. How do you breathe? How are you breathing? What kind of conditions are you imposing on the breath that makes it either short or shallow? And then if we start to make it a little bit deeper, what does that mean for you? What does it feel like? And then if we apply breath and movement combined, what is the overall experience? So, you know, you layer it like anything. Any beginner course, there'll be, I think, a structured way of teaching something, but ultimately at the end of the day, as people progress, the breath and movement become combined as one action, and it becomes the entire experience of the practice. So it depends, again, on the group, the person, where they're coming from, and sometimes you just have to isolate people and go from there and make it more specific.
You've studied with many different teachers and in many different styles over the past 20-25 years, haven't you?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah. So when people say to you, "Oh, what style do you teach?" How do you answer that question now?
That's a difficult question to
Yeah.
answer. Usually, I answer it with humor, and I say it's contemporary cuisine. It's a fusion of many different flavors, because it's hard to define. Is it a style or is it a personality? It's. I think most practices come from people's own particular experience of their practice, and what I see a good teacher as a person that deconstructs the information that they have received from their teacher in a way that then when they reconstruct the information, it comes from their language, it comes from their experience, and it comes from a place that's more authentic rather than being taught by rote. Because my teacher told me this, I'm telling you this. Well, then you're not having a true experience of what the teaching is. And so, like with any information, you have to actually embody it, you have to sense it, rather than intellectualize it. And sometimes that takes many years before you can then regurgitate it out as an experience that you've had.
So who would you consider then your main teachers? Or...
Oh,
that's another hard question, isn't it? Or maybe
my main teacher.
Some key moments where things just really clicked for you, or a new insight arose when you were with a particular teacher.
Usually the insights happen in the practice, but in terms of a particular teacher, probably Gary Craftsell. I mean, he redirected my practice at that time. It was a pretty much direct challenge to the way that I was generally practicing and teaching yoga. And so to fully embody what he was saying, to fully encompass the teachings, I had to radicalize my whole process. I had to step on the mat and become archaic with what I knew. So I would say Gary would be the one that sort of kind of changed my perception of yoga and created a much more multi-layered process to it.
So how important then do you think it is that teachers still have teachers? You understand what I'm saying? Because there's so many people who come through a 200-hour course or whatever, and there's such big trainings that you don't even necessarily have a one-on-one relationship with the teacher of that course, and then you're out teaching, no relationship to a teacher.
That's right. I think it's a gift in itself to teach, but it takes a while to become a teacher. And there's a lot of conflict that I see, and I'm trying to be politically correct around everything, but a lot of conflict that I see between what's been offered now as teacher training courses, and I'm part of the institution, of being a principal teacher for a 200-hour course. But hopefully, just 1 minute, sorry, I'll come back to that question after you said, all right. Hopefully, that the 200 hours or the 500 hours is just the beginning of a person's teaching career, if you want to call it that. It's just the very beginnings, the very beginnings of it.
Yeah, I've spoken to a few people about this recently, and that seems to be the general consensus, that the 200 hour is the beginning, and then from there we learn over time to, like you say, become a teacher.
Yeah, I mean, who came up with 200 hours or 500 hours? I mean, what does that mean?
I don't know.
How
many hours do you think you've done in the last 25 years? 10,000, 20,000? You think about it.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, how does that define the quality of a teacher? I mean, there's so many courses out there, and who quantifies or who validates the content of that course? And surely it's not Yoga Alliance. I mean, we can go on. We can go on about this.
That would be a huge thing. One small thing, though, that you just said, what does define the qualities of an amazing teacher? What makes a really good teacher?
An amazing teacher, I think, from a number of places. First, when we enter a room and we sense the teacher, it's not a tangible experience, but it's quite palatable in terms of energetically. And that the teacher itself, what they're saying, how they're saying, what they're expressing is coming from a really authentic place. And it's hard to quantify that sometimes. But I always recommend that you spend time with the teacher to be in their presence. And sometimes it's not so much what they say in a general public setting, but it's what they do outside of that I become more curious about. To me, that tells me more about them and the way that yoga affects them rather than actually what they say. To me, that's, again, the observational eye for both a teacher and student has to be subtle. It moves from the gross to the subtle. So when we start to look at teachers or start to want to follow a teacher, we need to spend some time, observing and sensing and going from that place. But I'm afraid, sometimes yoga is like a smorgasbord. We all have little bits and pieces of tastes of here and there and everywhere, but not really commit ourselves to any particular format.
Mm-hmm. Yes, digging those shallow wells all around the place and never going deep.
Totally, absolutely, yeah. So
to change focus for a moment, you've said before that the yoga doesn't start until someone has a home practice.
Yeah, that's right. I think the reason why I say that is because when you introduce a home practice, things start to change. And you start to motivate yourself from the inside out. You create the conditions of doing your practice rather than... See, I see class as an interesting phenomenon. It's like you have a studio purposely built, you have a class time, you have a teacher, you have some music or whatever, and all these things create the experience that is imposed on you. And so once the experience comes from the inside out, it's a slightly different practice altogether, completely different practice. And I think then the inquiry begins, because it's only just you.
So how do you motivate your students to practice at home?
How do I motivate them?
Do you motivate them, or do you just leave it up to them and it just happens naturally? Or
yeah, well, usually if the students usually become curious about some of the information that I provide. And sometimes we have privates, and we have private sessions, and through the private sessions I will give them things to do, and I keep it fairly realistic, and asking them to maybe work for 10 or 15 minutes a day on certain things, so it fits into their life. But ultimately the motivation comes from them. And so my motivation, I'm not there to motivate them to do a home practice. The curiosity, the inclination of practicing has to come from them. And it does. And if they're committed to a process, personal process, they eventually will start to commit themselves to a home practice in time.
So it becomes a natural unfolding of the journey.
It is. And one thing that yoga has taught me, it's about time. Everything happens in time. It doesn't happen in a click of a finger. But consumerism makes us want it now.
Yes.
Exactly.
So as a teacher, what have you got unfolding in time over the next year, or what's your edge at the moment, or what's exciting you as a teacher?
And what's exciting me as a teacher? Definitely private sessions. I do enjoy working one-on-one with people, and working in particular ways now that is very different than I have in the past. And also at the same time, there's always something on the go. We've got these retreats going on in Bali, and that's become really successful. The processes that we're working with there really does make the practice much more intimate. It gives people an opportunity to experience the process or their practice or their bodies in very different ways. So that's exciting, and there's always something artistic that's going on as well. So pursue that somewhere along the line when I can fit it in, and then there's family as well. So and life is full.
So one final question then. You've also once said that flexible people can be assholes. Flexibility doesn't define your character. Am I correctly attributing that to you?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm afraid that yoga has been defined as posture now, and that somehow or another defining one's practices through the skill of the practice, how advanced they are in terms of posture and how well they do it. But ultimately, is it about that? Is the practice about more advanced poses, going further? I mean, there's an optimum point for everybody, and eventually your body will break. And another thing that you can attribute to me as well is that I tell people in class, it's good to, inspire to progress in your practice. You will achieve something, and then in time, as we get older, whatever you have achieved will diminish. You will lose as a skill, and one day you will be dead. And so it's not about the posture. It's about really, again, if I can simplify it, it's not about getting to a point, but it's how do you get to that point? How do you progress to that place? And I think really what we're trying to do as practitioners is become much more aware of many different facets of who we are. From a gross physical component to much more subtle, intimate arrangements, and hopefully that we can start to develop greater insight through that, rather than whether we can touch our toes or not. That to me that is secondary, if not right down the list on the reasons why you would want to do yoga. Some people, anyway, stretching your hamstrings can cause sacroiliac problems. Sometimes your hamstrings need to be active rather than passive. So I like to be pragmatic around the process, no flowery stuff for me.
Beautiful. Vincent, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to the Yoga Lunchbox audience. It's a pleasure to meet you through this, and I'll put some information down the bottom so people can get in touch with you if they want to find out more about your teaching.
Thank you very much, Kara-Leah. I really appreciate the time and your efforts too.